In the past 72 hours, I've spent nearly every waking moment playtesting and running through Chaos Zero Nightmare like a madman. I've been keeping notes, bug testing, and messing with the game in all sorts of ways, and with this, I've got a pretty healthy idea of the title and why I think this might be one of the most insane gachas that we've ever seen. With this, today I'll be breaking down everything you need to know about Smilegate's new title, and why you might just want to start playing it come October. Let's start by talking about the battle, or more specifically, actual gameplay. Now, the core gameplay of Chaos Zero Nightmare feels like Chrono Arc X Slay the Spire, and this has a turn system where you draw cards, have action points to spend, and the cards don't recycle immediately so that it prevents infinite looping and encourages planning. Now, in terms of this, we also have another mechanic known as stress, and this basically forces your squad into sharing a health bar that also gets affected by stress, and each individual character also has a stress meter, and taking too much damage will build stress, and once stress maxes out, this means that you break down and you end up taking a bunch of damage or basically being incapable of acting. Now, once you are actually in the breakdown or stress breaking mode, your deck or some of your cards are replaced with breakdown cards, and this prevents you from using your ultimates as previously mentioned, and your team also loses, again, max HP. Now, once you recover from the state, you do actually restore max HP, but it only heals about half, and overall the enemy mechanics, and in most cases the mechanics of most bosses that you'll see in this game, all have varied or very specific individual to themselves mechanics. However, the general more shared mechanics are action counts, and every card that you play will lower the enemy's card counter, and when it hits 0 they will act immediately even if it's on your turn. Now, in terms of this, there's also a toughness bar, which is probably something that a lot of you guys are familiar with from other titles where you're able to break or stall or exhaust enemies, and this will reduce stress and refund your action points. Now, in terms of the actual designs of characters though, and as I'll showcase here in a moment, the character designs are definitely not by any means generic, and they're actually quite grotesque or really ugly looking, which is a good thing as it's not generic slimes or trees of some sort. Now, to add to this, there are ego skills, which are your ultimates and your cinematic flashy skills that not only give you honestly value as a combatant, but they can also be used with your partner or your quote-unquote weapon cards, which is pretty cool. Now, there is also auto mode in terms of gameplay here. However, it is worth mentioning here that the auto for the game is kind of similar to that of Girls Frontline 2, where it doesn't feel absolutely amazing, and you're in most cases kind of wishing that you could automate or affect the auto mode a bit more manually so you could make it use certain skills in order. Overall, okay, and probably usable for farming, but definitely not usable, and it's not even activated for the roguelike mode, which we'll get into in a moment. Now, we should actually talk about the combatants themselves, as there is a decent amount of character variety already, alongside some other interesting facts about them. Now, first and foremost, the combatants or the characters are defined by their class, faction, and attribute. The classes range from high attack characters like rangers to tanky vanguards, and factions tie into the story, while attributes include things like, basically all the colors that you're seeing here. This includes passion, void, instinct, order, and justice, which is all pretty typical for what we've seen thus far and is totally fine. However, in general, what I would say is that in most cases, you're not going to worry too much about elements unless, of course, they specifically ask that you use it. Now, it is, of course, also worth mentioning that in terms of the character building in this game, you can not only promote, you can also increase, or rather equip these stats or improve the stats of a character using a partner card, and this is alongside a potential system, which is something that you guys are probably familiar with basically any skill tree or tree, especially if you're, familiar with the Hoyoverse or the epicseven type systems. Now, to add to this, there is, of course, a constellation system, and these are by no means typical or just, a stat increase, which may be something that you're more familiar with from epicseven, but instead we take more of the modern gacha route, which is that once you have certain imprints or additional constellations of a character, yes, they do actually improve and give you significant changes to the kit. or the character that you're looking at. Now, to add to this, you also start with 4 cards and you generate unique cards throughout combat and through the roguelike, which is kind of complicated, and I'm not super familiar exactly with that system or when exactly you're, I guess, like what the best way to generate cards is, as it does feel a bit RNG, but each character also has an ego skill, which of course is the ultimate. Now, the partners, as I mentioned earlier, are the weapons in disguise, and they provide flat stats, class locked passives, and their own ultimate abilities as well. The class lock obviously means that passives only work when you match them to the correct character, or rather class, and this is one of the only few ways to boost crit rate and crit damage, which is pretty significant. Now, duplicates strengthen the passives up to 5 copies, and again, one thing that makes the cards a bit, or I guess like the weapons, a bit more unique compared to other games is that the characters are, or rather the weapons, look literally just like characters, but they have arts and ultimates, which is cool, but honestly kind of a shame because some of the partners I wish were actually playable. Now, in terms of beyond the combatants themselves, we should also talk about the chaos system, or the chaos mission system, as this is one of the main ways, or one of the main gameplay loops of the title. Now, this is the roguelike mode, and part of the reason why people I guess associate this title with titles like Slay the Spire and Chrono Arc. However, I do want to also mention that in terms of more recent gachas, this does also feel a bit similar to Uma Musume, if this is a game that you've played, as again, you do kind of have to improve or increase the power of your characters through structured continuous runs back to back, which you can then use in the future for other content to improve your characters in non-chaos manifestation modes. Now, with this, there are certain difficulties to each zone, of course, and depending on what access, or depending on what you gain access to, the difficulty ramps up and also gives you things like first time achievement rewards. However, in general, this is easily one of the most time consuming and more, I guess, like rewarding for those of you that enjoy Slay the Spire modes that you can interact with in the game. However, it really is a true roguelike, as again, you have a complete map that you run down. You can, I guess, rest. You can basically run through the map in any way that you want. You get supply drops. You have the ability to pick up equipment. And with said roguelike mode, you should make, or it should be noted that although each roguelike mode is obviously designed to sometimes give your entire team buffs or bonuses themselves, something that a lot of people are doing is that, or I guess one possibility is that people will run through these chaos zones just trying to buff one character, kind of similar to what you do in maybe something again like Uma Musume, and buff your character to insanity and then run through another run and again have said character be super strong as well. Now, with this, the save data system is exactly what people are probably referring to when it comes to the legacy or the inheritance system of other titles. And again, this is how you reuse builds and harder missions, and it basically persists beyond one run. And in addition to this, it should also be mentioned that if you end up running one of these chaos manifestations, but one of your characters ends up being like mind broken, or they induce like a terrible mind state, or they get broken basically through stress, it is worth mentioning that you'll have to counsel them, or you'll have to specifically spend a resource from the Arc City, which we'll get into in a moment. Otherwise, your save data and all your progress in your chaos or quote unquote roguelike run will actually disappear, which is not necessarily the most insane thing, as again, you are able to counsel them. However, just keep in mind that you do have a specific limitation to how many times you can do that in a day. Now, in terms of the gacha system, this is probably the most contested or one of the most controversial parts of the title. There's a 1% base 5-star rate until 57 pulls, and from that point, I believe there's an increased soft pity from that point. However, in most cases, if I'm not mistaken, this does guarantee you a pull at, I believe it's either 70 or it should be at 70 as it's reading here. However, honestly, I don't necessarily trust the text here, as I'll get into in a moment. Now, in terms of the observation data and the signals or the pull banner itself, Unfortunately, guys, yes, this is another 50-50 type modern gacha system. If you win, of course, you get the character. If you lose, the next character will, or the next 5-star that you get will be the guaranteed. However, to add to this, there is also a weapon banner or a partner banner. And although this is a little bit different, as this is actually a 100% guaranteed weapon banner, you are also able to choose which banner or which weapon that you want from the partner specific banner, which is pretty nice. However, again, I know that a lot of people are not necessarily a fan of the Hoyoverse system. Now, to add to this, the standard combatant banner, from what we understand, should have all non-limited characters. However, a banner that you aren't seeing right now is a beginner banner, and part of the reason why I'm not super trustful of the contents of the banners currently, part of the reason for that is because the banner read that you would be able to guarantee a 5-star at 30 pulls. However, if I'm not mistaken, it actually took me until 50 or even higher than this number of pulls in order to get it, and of course it obviously disappeared once I finished the banner, which is why it's not on screen now. To add to this, there is also a cosmetic animation banner, which I think is one of the more interesting aspects of the title, and this allows you basically to animate your card character or your character cards, and this has a 70 pity, no 50-50, and there's a guaranteed 4-star guarantee every 10 pulls. However, you can also change the observation target or the character that you want to pull this for. This is honestly pretty nice, just kind of like a cosmetic thing that I think most people can appreciate, kind of similar to as if like the Bang Boos from Zenless Zone Zero, which is another technically separate pull system, was a bit more free or was more cosmetic, though of course Bang Boos are a bit more impactful. Now, despite all this, the critique here is that obviously the system, despite being the norm in modern gachas, is not ideal. Obviously, everyone would wish or would hope that, number one, probably this wasn't gacha at all, but also probably that the systems or the rate was a bit more consistent. There are other systems in modern gachas at this point where you're just guaranteed to get the character. Thinking more specifically to Smilegate's other title, epicseven actually has a guarantee system when you pull for the banner character. However, on said banner as well is not just the character but also the weapon. And although technically speaking, the quote-unquote artifact or weapon for epicseven can be lost, or it's like 50-50 whether or not you get something else on said banner for you know, the other summon gacha, it is also worth mentioning that in this case, not only is your weapon gamba separate, you obviously lose the 50-50 on the character, which is what I think most people are probably most upset about. Now, despite this, there are other titles like Duet Night Abyss that have adjusted or basically moved away completely from 50-50s, or even their gacha entirely, which is, I know, probably one of the more controversial or interesting takes that we've seen in the space right now. But this was after community feedback, and maybe there's a chance that they end up doing this, as Duet Night Abyss is also slated, if I'm not mistaken, for an October release. And who knows, that could be pretty crazy, all things considered, if CZN takes a page out of their book. It is what it is. Now, in terms of this, however, we should also talk about the shop in currency. And although we aren't obviously able to spend in the closed beta, there are a few things that you've probably seen from this that look familiar. Yes, this is basically what the modern gacha or Hoyoverse title shop also looks like, and this gives you things like access to standard banner characters, some pulls every month, and also the ability to pull for other S rank or high rank characters as well, not just the base 4 or A rank characters that you'd probably imagine. Now, to add to this, I would say that in terms of generosity, this is nothing special. Obviously, it is nice to be able to pull for characters or S rank characters eventually and have a pity system, but as I'm sure you guys are probably aware of by this point, this is kind of just the industry standard at this point. So it is what it is. Not terrible, not awful, but honestly could probably still be worked on in any case. Now, I do also want to talk about the story and voice acting of the game. The story concept and the storytelling in both ways is not only interesting but pretty in-depth and also quite dark. I do want to say though that despite a lot of people probably giving high praise to the story and voice acting, which I also agree with, there were definitely some moments, and especially as you're going through some of these random missions on the side through the kind of like counter sidey-esque storyline, there are a lot of moments here where it just feels like it's endless yapping. and slow pacing. However, I would definitely argue that for the first chapter of the story, it is entirely engaged, like fully immersed, and you really kind of don't even want to play the game. You just want to keep going through the dialogue to see what happens, which I think is pretty insane. But overall, I won't spoil too much about the story and the voice acting. Just know that it's pretty top-notch and high quality, especially for a title that, I don't know, in terms of, I guess, like storytelling, I wasn't really expecting this, as epicseven has also had a bit of difficulty sometimes with proper non-yapping storytelling. But that was definitely not the case for Chaos Zero Nightmare. Now, in terms of this as well, or on the topic of presentation, the audio and the presentation of the game is also quite memorable and even lingers in some cases after playing. Now, the sound effects of the game are also super grotesque, unique, and sometimes even unsettling, but honestly fitting for, again, a very dark and kind of zombie undeady type title. However, just again, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the characters or the monsters that you'll fight, regardless of what it is that you end up fighting, the monsters, or the horrors, I should really even say, do genuinely fit or look special enough to warrant some of the audio design and even some of the visual design. It doesn't feel like they're carbon copies, as I mentioned, and again, this, alongside the audio from the title, really does immerse you way more than I'd expect. And the animations as well, in terms of the characters, also look good too. As you're seeing on screen right now, although there are chibis, in most cases, what you'll actually end up seeing is somewhat of a live 2D or a 2D animation on the side with your character in POV. And because of this constant adjustment between 2D to 2.5D to chibi, it actually feels like the characters are super dynamic and ever changing, and it doesn't necessarily feel like instead that you are like exclusively playing a chibi game or even necessarily only playing 2D, though some people obviously prefer one or another. Now, in terms of the daily system, this is another system that people are probably pretty interested in. The dailies are not very difficult at all. This is kind of similar dailies wise in terms of, or similar to that of a game like Nikke or other titles, where it feels like you have to enter into this, this whole go into like a, I guess like a sanctuary or a city type thing, do some activities, log in, use your energy, then log out, and you've completed your dailies. But I will say that despite this being similar to other titles, this is by no means the worst daily system that we've ever seen. It's actually quite nice, all things considered. Now, as far as I could tell, or as far as I could tell currently, and although this may get changed in the future, the current energy system for Chaos Zero Nightmare is okay, but not amazing. Now, I say this because there is like a free energy system that you can get through the Garden Cafe coffee shop, which allows you to order, or rather have like a stock of some energy from here. However, if you also choose, you could just get a raw amount of energy to, or rather 20 more energy than this, but just a raw amount of energy that you could use rather than stockpiling it. And while this isn't necessarily insane, the fact that they have a system like this but no overflow system for your energy kind of feels weird, especially because they've already thought about some sort of additional stamina addition to the game, but haven't considered an overflow system. Again, just very odd, because again, they definitely take inspiration from other modern gacha systems, but for some reason didn't end up taking something like this. Now, there are other features that, again, I kind of teased, and this includes the more PvE or the more city-like systems. This includes things like, again, the ability to bond in said location. You can hang out with whatever character you want. You can give them gifts. You can fix their psychiatric, I guess, issues or their stress levels and things like this. There's also excursions, and on that topic, it should also be noted that your affinity or your level or your affinity level with a character will actually correspond to a number of stats that you gain and lose, which can be pretty impactful. Though again, I don't know how insane a couple HP here is, though probably over I guess like 30 or so levels it can be quite impactful. Now, to add to this, there is also things like the different research facilities where you can improve or upgrade your city, and this is alongside things like a diner where you can buy food in order to buff your next run, and again, just some overall lifestyle systems that flesh out the gameplay and do kind of make it feel more like an experience rather than just, I guess, like a daily thing where you send off people to go do random activities. So overall, guys, Chaos Zero Nightmare looks like a pretty fascinating hybrid of a lot of gachas and kind of like Slay the Spire meets another gacha. The combat animations are spectacular, the roguelike structure keeps runs fresh, and the partner system is honestly pretty unique. The party, or rather the story in general, is very promising, even if the dialogue can drag at times, and the voice acting is also very powerful, alongside the audio design being genuinely impressive. Now, overall, between everything that I've seen, although there are, some caveats to whether or not this game is really worth it or whether or not you may play this, because some people just definitely do not want to play any 50-50 gachas. Honestly, the amount of effort that they put into the game, both from the visual gameplay, the strategy, and even like the audio design, is just so above and beyond what you'd expect from a title or from something like this, that it's honestly just impressive and kind of like jaw-dropping in terms of what you would have expected for other titles. Or if it honestly wasn't made by Smilegate, I could definitely imagine a title like this having a bunch of issues or slop or some reuse thing or some other main or major issue that would turn me away from playing the title. However, as it is from the creators of epicseven, you can already tell that there are so many things, not just from the art, but also in terms of like the strategy sort of depth, that honestly make it quite impressive and appealing to play. But even with all the issues that I've described, guys, honestly, the presentation and gameplay loop already make Chaos Zero Nightmare stand out to me as one of the most exciting upcoming titles that I'll probably be trying. But of course, guys, everything here is based on the current beta, so expect changes before launch. But for now, Chaos Zero Nightmare is absolutely a promising gacha to watch out for, and I honestly encourage you guys to take a look at this whenever you get a chance, or honestly to try the game at least for a little bit when obviously it drops in October. That said, I want to give a very, very clear, distinct disclaimer or reminder here at the end that this video is not sponsored by any means. However, again, if you'd like to check out this title, feel free to do so. Obviously, it is in beta though. Thanks again for watching though, guys. I'll see you all the next time that I come out of my cave after I stop playing this game. But thanks again for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.